Alright. Welcome to episode 2 of this series. Today we are going to talk all about
animation.
This episode is going to be a little more in depth than the previous video, so bear with me. I will be dividing this video into 3 key parts today: setup, the exercises, and the cool stuff. So let's start with the setup. So the very basic. How do you start Blender? Okay, maybe not like that, but for real though, how do we start Blender? Especially in the context of a 2D animation project. Now you can go about the usual way of firing it up like regular folks, deleting the little helpless cube, and then adding a grease pencil object, then setting the camera, a background color, tabbing into draw mode, setting up materials and layers and selecting brushes, and fortunately there is a better way, which is this 2D animation mode on the splash screen itself. Why? I'm glad you asked. Because when you click this, you're thrown right into a scene with a camera nicely set up, background all white, a grease pencil object with some basic layers and materials set up, already added and tabbed into draw mode, which all basically means is that as soon as you start Blender in this mode, you're ready to jump in and start drawing. Now one last thing that you would want to do is go hit the preferences and make these changes. Assuming that by now you're using a drawing tablet and not a mouse. If so, then these settings will help you navigate Blender much better using a tablet instead of a mouse. And with that, we are done with the setup. Now let's have some fun. Alright, so with our view set to the camera and our grease pencil object tabbed into draw mode, let's start with our first frame. Flip this auto keyframe thing on and notice how that the moment you draw or input something on the canvas, this little diamond thing appears in the timeline. That's a keyframe. It is what holds the entire content of your canvas at this moment of time until you draw something again on another frame, which then makes a new keyframe with a completely fresh new canvas. Alright? Now, before we move ahead with the rest of the frames, a quick little crash course in
animation.
The entirety of animation basically could be boiled down to just these two things: timing and spacing. Time and space. If you master these two things, you basically have mastered 90% of animation. So, what exactly is this time and space? Simply put, time has to do with speed, like how fast or slow something is moving, and space has to do with distance, and these two are interlinked. Less space or less spacing between the frames, time will move slow, and less distance will be covered. More space equals to time has moved fast. Alright, enough theory. Let's apply this to our ball, which is now falling. Why? Also, let me just quickly turn this onion skin thing on so that we can see our previous frames more clearly. So with timing and spacing in mind, this ball will be gaining some speed now. Speed means wider spacing. So in our next keyframe, it would be somewhere over here. Cool, next frame. Assuming that this is a soft ball made of something like rubber, now with gravity pulling down on it, it would stretch a little. But the key here is to not change the volume of the object, right? Next keyframe, more stretch, wider spacing. And now here we have the real keyframe, the impact. Now in this frame of impact, all this momentum is suddenly stopped by the ground, right? So the ball will end up getting squashed. Now we can give it a few more frames to ease up the squash and without changing the volume, of course. And then in the very next frame, all that energy, all that build up will be pushed right back into the ball and will jump back up. Then the same logic follows, but in reverse. Less stretch and less spacing between the frames as the energy in this ball and gravity sort of cancel each other out. With that, we have our first bouncing ball animation. Now let's do it again, but in a slightly different way. Like animating our own little action scene. We'll put everything that we have learned so far into practice. Let's have a quick recap. So,
What do we know? What have we learned?
Okay.
We know nothing and we've learned Khanta.
Now, before moving forward, I'm assuming that you have watched the first episode of this series and are clear about how the canvas works in Grease Pencil. If not, the link's in the description or on the screen somewhere. With that being said, time to make something really cool. Here is the idea. You're going to have two characters, one on this side of the frame, looking for the other guy, but the other guy jumps out of nowhere and slash! Cuts him open. I promise. Really simple. Now that we have an idea, let's see where we can take this. So, based off of this, let's first block out a scene. Alright, let's add two grease pencil objects, one for each character, flip on the canvas and the onion skin on both of these, set the view mode to front and add in a camera. Now, with the camera selected, let's pop out an adjacent window where we can see what the camera sees. Now, I usually like to turn this these borders basically, I usually turn them completely black so that there are no distractions. Speaking of distractions, let's also remove all unnecessary elements like the headers and stuff and roughly frame the scene as we want. Now place the characters, that is the grease pencil objects, in their respective positions. This guy will be closer to the camera, looking in this direction, and the other guy will jump from way back over here. So let's put him somewhere in the back, right? Alright, so the positions are roughly blocked as we can see here in the camera view. Also, this is somewhat falling in the rule of thirds, so I guess that's a good thing too. Alright, let's lock everything in place by setting an initial keyframe on everything. Let's go to object mode, hit I, and that would set a keyframe here. Let's do that for the other character as well. Now while we are at it, let's also rename our characters here in the outliner. Okay, and lastly, keyframes for the camera as well. Now, let's move towards getting a rough animation block, starting with Wolf, this character over here. So let's set some keyframes and animate this jump. Now, I want him to jump twice. A small jump at first, then a big leap, making sure it follows an arc, something like this. Let's pan up the camera as well to better frame the shot. I'll quickly set the other keyframes as well. And that's our rough block. Now I know this doesn't really look like much right now, but stay with me. This will all make sense in a minute when we move to the most fun part, character animation. Allow me to introduce you to the layers and materials property panels. With this grease pencil object selected, enter draw mode and navigate to this data tab. Now the first time that I opened this, everything looked super confusing, but it really isn't as complex as it seems. If you're familiar with like Photoshop or Procreate or like any other 2D software, this will be a breeze. So our layers are over here, then some masking options, blend modes and a few other stuff, right? Here we can add more layers, order them, reorder them, lock them, lower the opacity, play with blend modes and all that stuff. Exactly like you would do in Photoshop or any other 2D software. Now while we're at it, let's create a new layer, call this, and move it below the lines layer. Next, let's hit the materials tab and just delete all these. We will create one from scratch. Give it a name, set the color to black and uncheck fill. Alright, let's also lower the opacity of the canvas in both these views, turn on the onion skin and make sure that auto keyframe is on. Cool. So for the first frame, he will be sitting in a perching pose, something like this maybe. Maybe his arms could be up and out like this instead. Next frame, let me lower the opacity of the onion skin over here. So for this next one, let's squash this pose a little before he jumps to add in a little anticipation or the effect of charging up for the jump. Slightly fold his arms and the blades would also start to come out a bit over here, right? And in the very next frame, he would jump up. This will be a big stretch pose, releasing his energy. See how this is exactly like the bouncing ball? Then he will squash up again into a ball with his claws out. Stretch before the landing again. Wide spacing. Sort of like an arrow that's reaching down. On to the next pose, and this will be a squash again. Let's add another pose to ease in the landing. Sort of like adding a suspension, right? Just a subtle change. Now one thing that I'm actively keeping in my mind is to make the silhouette of this character very readable and clear. Now before the next jump, I'm going to add one more anticipation pose to enunciate the jump a bit. and then he will take all this energy and jump. So a stretch. His chest leads the action. And the next pose, slide squash, as he starts to open up for the attack. Now let me quickly finish the other poses as well. So, this is what we have so far. Not too bad, right? Now I will animate the other character as well. Now that we have the basic skeleton of the animation ready, all I did from here on was add inking and materials. Like the name suggests, this is a very straightforward part. Let's lock the rough layer and lower its opacity so that we can draw on top of it. Now I'll make a fresh new layer for inking and start inking each keyframe one by one. Now this might seem like the most tedious part, but for me honestly, this was the most satisfying and therapeutic part of the entire thing. I could see the ideas in my head finally take some solid shape and form and watch the characters come alive. Now as a final touch, I added some colors using the materials tab. Again the same process, selected the color layer, locked all the other layers and added a new material for each color and simply painted each keyframe again one by one. Now this is where I could play with all the blood spurts. And finally, there we have it.
I don't want to fight you, Peanut. I just need your help.
I don't care.
I don't want to fight you, Peanut. I just need your help.
I don't care.